Welcome to the Fixing Your City podcast. Here's George Crandall.
Chapter 1. Our cities need help. Cities become undesirable places to live and invest when effective plans to shape growth and development are lacking and short-term economic interests control decision-making. As a young architect just out of school, I was excited to begin working in the Portland office of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, known as SOM, a firm with a fine national and international reputation. I'd been hired as an architect, but in the time I started working on some of the larger planning projects in the office. One of the most important was the Environmental Impact Statement, EIS, for the proposed Mount Hood Freeway, an ill-conceived proposal to build a freeway through the heart of Portland's southeast residential neighborhoods. This experience became definitive for my personal development as an architect and urban designer. Due to a shortage of workspace, the project team for the freeway study was relegated to another floor of the building. That meant I was constantly taking the elevator between two floors and cultures, as I had a drafting table in both places, one on the 16th floor for my architectural projects, and one on the 3rd floor for the Mount Hood Freeway project. Life on the two floors couldn't have been more different. On the 16th floor, sitting at long rows of drafting tables under overhead fluorescent lights, the architects and engineers in their white button-down shirts and conservative ties were bent over boards, pencils in hand, creating office buildings, hospitals, and other large buildings. No one ever talked about how buildings should relate to the street or what the context was for an architectural design. Downstairs on the 3rd floor, it was anything but buttoned down. Long hair, colorful shirts, and floor-length skirts for the women were the norm for the 30 or so staff as they pored over maps and reports. The schedule for completing the environmental impact study was particularly tight, and it wasn't unusual to find someone sleeping under a desk when I arrived in the morning. Downstairs was always lots of lively discussion. Specialized consultants, transportation engineers, landscape architects, air quality and acoustic engineers, historians and economists added their diverse views and expertise to the mix. Our team was passionate about trying to save Portland's east side neighborhoods from the destructive impacts of the freeway. If built, the freeway would have destroyed 1,700 homes, displaced 5,000 people, and eliminated 1,900 jobs. Our EIS findings indicated that the freeway would not relieve congestion, and it would be an obsolete when completed. These findings were devastating and definitive. The project was shelved. Upstairs, I learned about the fine art of designing buildings. Downstairs, I learned to appreciate the complex forces that shape our cities. Our cities are always changing. Populations expand and contract. New businesses arrive and others leave. Large employers go out of business as the demand for their products wanes due to changing markets or domestic and foreign competition. Big box stores on the edge of downtown suck the life out of the downtown retail core. New highways create opportunities for development on the edge of the city that compete with downtown businesses. Cities change for many reasons. In most cases, their downtowns suffer. Though cities come in all sizes, their problems are universal. Growing towns and cities all have to deal with automobile congestion and the demand for affordable housing. Cities that are losing population have to contend with shrinking revenues and a diminishing ability to provide public services. If these and other problems are ignored, a city will continue to degrade. Cities are like buildings. They need to be updated from time to time. At the most basic level, if infrastructure, roads, water, and sewer system are not maintained, the city becomes an undesirable place in which to live and do business. In addition to basic maintenance tasks, cities need programs to attract employment and keep retail healthy. They should provide public amenities such as parks and open space, promote a wide range of housing choices, support high-quality education, and encourage the development of cultural and entertainment facilities. With all of these competing demands, the primary question for every city is where to spend scarce public funds. What are the projects or programs that will be most beneficial? What public improvements will attract the best private investment and improve the quality of life? Answers to these and many other questions can be answered by creating a transformation strategy. This is the essential tool for fixing a city, whether large or small, whether losing or gaining population. An effective transformation strategy eliminates guesswork and guides decision-making about spending priorities and critical interventions. Before attempting to solve a city's problems, it is helpful to have an understanding of how its physical character eroded over time. Then solutions for correcting the situation can be developed. Typically, most problems faced by cities result from 1. A depletion of retail offering, 2. The creation of a hostile pedestrian environment, and 3. The preponderance of visual blight and chaos, specifically depleted retail offerings. Strip malls, big box stores, and shopping centers located outside of the city center diminish the downtown's economic vitality and force many retailers to close shop. The downtown retail environment is further weakened as non-retail uses such as real estate offices, law offices, and exercise studios move into vacant ground floor space once occupied by shops and other retail enterprises. Retail buildings are demolished to make way for new banks, office buildings, and surface parking lots. More traffic lanes are added and curbside parking for the convenience of retail customers is removed, further discouraging shopping. Retail-friendly two-way streets are changed to one-way streets to accommodate more automobile traffic. Hostile pedestrian environment. Sidewalks are narrowed to allow for additional lanes of traffic, thereby reducing the space available for outdoor retail displays, benches, restaurant seating, and side-by-side walking. Curbside parking is removed and physical separation between pedestrians and moving traffic is lacking, which makes pedestrians feel unsafe. Intersections are widened, increasing the crossing distance for pedestrians. Automated pedestrian traffic signals are replaced by push-button signals, which frustrate pedestrians who want to cross the street without asking for permission. Surface parking lots, drive-through banking facilities, and faceless office facades replace retail storefronts, further degrading the walking experience. Large civic structures such as government offices, arenas, and convention centers with ground-level blank walls are built in the center of downtown, creating an environment that feels unsafe. Another reason, visual blight and chaos. Historic facades are covered with cheap, trendy building materials. Unique historic buildings are demolished and replaced with characterless modern buildings. New buildings are constructed next to landmark historic buildings without consideration of design compatibility. Placeless structures that don't reflect regional character, climate conditions, or local values are built. Oversized, garish, and inappropriately placed signage creates further visual blight. Not every city can be fixed. I'm often asked if downtowns with a depleted retail offering and a hostile pedestrian environment can be salvaged. In some cases, the answer is no, because there are just too many buildings that have inactive ground floors. For example, many buildings may have blank walls or excessive building setbacks from the public sidewalk. Some buildings may be parking structures that lack commercial activity at the ground level. These are sometimes referred as bunker buildings and often cannot be renovated due to floor elevations that don't match adjacent sidewalks, interior spaces not suited to commercial uses, or prohibitive remodeling costs. If a downtown has too many bunker buildings, its situation may be terminal. Terminal downtowns are legion in the United States and Canada. Obviously, there's always something that can be done to improve any downtown. But in most cases, isolated bunker building improvements don't really make a meaningful difference. The challenge for cities is to take steps to prevent bunker buildings from being built in the first place. From time to time, the urban design pundits like to identify what they consider to be the worst designed cities in the world. Atlanta, Jakarta, and Sao Paulo are frequently singled out for this dubious distinction. These cities have serious problems stemming from the absence of planning, too much congestion, and urban sprawl. At the same time, everyone has a favorite city. In Europe, it might be Florence or Barcelona. In the United States, it might be Savannah or Santa Fe. In Canada, many people love Quebec and Vancouver. All these cities have one thing in common: they're pedestrian friendly. Though it may seem an oversimplification to evaluate a city in terms of its pedestrian experience, the fact is that the public's yardstick for what constitutes a favorite city is how it feels to walk down the streets of that city. Invariably, desirable places are pedestrian friendly. If the pedestrian experience is so fundamental to creating a desirable city, why don't more cities take action to protect and enhance the pedestrian arena? Regrettably, the reason is that the automobile has become the primary force shaping our cities, and the automobile has voracious demands for convenient access, bigger roads, and more parking. Satisfying those demands has become the top priority for most city transportation engineers. Replacing the automobile with the pedestrian as the top priority is the fundamental first step for any city that is serious about transformation. A word about flawed plans. Commonly, when I visit a city for the first time, people say, "We've been planning for years and nothing ever changes." We don't want another plan that sits on a shelf. The public's perception is right. Too few transformation plans are implemented or result in tangible change. Flawed plans can be attributed to an arbitrary planning process, a lack of public involvement, failure to address implementation, or the adoption of planning placebos. Problems may also stem from the planning profession's limited experience, the lack of money, or a failure to develop informed design alternatives. More about those subjects: an arbitrary planning process. As strange as it may seem, there are few standardized procedures for preparing a city transformation strategy. If you ask a group of planners to describe the procedure for preparing and implementing such a plan, each would have a different answer. In other professions such as law, medicine, or architecture, clear procedures have evolved and are followed. Architects, for example, have a specific set of steps they go through to design a building and have it constructed. The American Institute of Architects, AIA, defines standardized procedures for the full range of services that an architect provides. This makes it easy for both the client and architect to agree on services and to measure the progress of a project. Both parties agree on what it takes to move from the drawing board to a finished building. The process, which is logical and results-oriented, includes discrete phases: schematic design, design development, preparation of contract documents, and contract administration. The comparable professional organization for planners, the American Planning Association, APA, does not provide a similar set of guidelines. There are no standardized processes for planning professionals to adhere to, nor any standardized procedures and contractual forms. Consequently, agreements between professional planners and their clients often lack clarity. In the absence of nationwide standards, shelf plans have proliferated across the country. The confusion surrounding how planners conduct their work is often reflected in requests for proposals, RFPs, which are sent out to planning firms when a city agency or other client seeks professional planning assistance. Typically, an RFP includes the scope of work and budget. However, there are no standardized guidelines for what a scope of work should include. Some clients want a verbal vision or a narrative that will describe a way to change their city. Other clients prefer a process that entails analyzing and salvaging parts of the previous discarded shelf plan with the expectation that a better solution will emerge. Still, other clients want a planning firm to develop a set of detailed standards or codes for the city, while fundamental design work for establishing the rationale for the codes is ignored. A client may seek a solution based on detailed market study that identifies specific types of new developments with the hopes that the free market will respond accordingly and the ideal project will be built. Another popular, though woeful misguided approach is that cities' problems can be resolved by simply commissioning a study that addresses parking deficiencies. There are even clients who believe that the creation of a branding campaign for a city is the key to transformation. Unfortunately, none of these approaches will get the job done. Another problem is unrealistic planning horizons. It is not uncommon that a city planning director will want a 25-year plan. While there is nothing inherently wrong with looking ahead that far into the future, it is unlikely that anyone who prepares or advocates for a 25-year plan will be around for such a long length of time. A 25-year plan is an invitation to do nothing in the short term, assuming that someone will take care of things at a later date. A phased plan that gives highest priority to the initial 5-year phase is a better alternative. If momentum is not well established in the first 5 years, the plan has little chance of success. Another problem is timid plans. Timid plans are a product of inexperienced planners and consultants. They contain vague and ineffective proposals. Good plans contain bold interventions that solve fundamental problems. A robust strategy that captures the imagination of the public and key decision makers is easier to implement. Another problem is a planning vacuum. In the absence of a plan, real estate developers are often able to convince decision makers to approve projects that are not in the community's best interest. Why is that? In the short term, their projects can create jobs and increase tax revenues. But too often, the long-term reality is just the opposite. Their projects, due to location or design, end up making the city transformation even more difficult to achieve. Another problem is lack of follow-through. A common misconception in the world of planning is that once a plan is finished, implementation will simply happen of its own accord. Actually, implementation won't happen if it is left up to city staff and elected officials. Elected officials come and go, and city staff does not have the political muscle needed to get things done. Implementation will only happen if a committee of influential citizens is appointed by city officials to oversee and drive the implementation process. Another problem is inadequate or ineffective public involvement. Most everyone agrees that public involvement in a planning process is a good thing. However, the quality and effectiveness of the public's participation in the process is not always guaranteed. The crucial factor is whether or not there are meaningful opportunities for the public to contribute to shaping the contents of the plan itself. At a minimum, this requires that the public be able to 1. Identify the issues that need to be addressed, 2. Select and vote on alternatives for addressing those issues, and 3. Review and comment on the implementation strategy. Unfortunately, in recent years, a cottage industry of consultants has emerged that ignores these basic requirements for effective public participation. Not infrequently, pundits like to refer to these public participation programs as public manipulation programs. And for good reason. The intent is not to gain useful information, but to convince or sell the public on a preconceived outcome. Some consultants specialize in keeping the public at bay in order to protect government agencies. Typically, they convene endless meetings that wear the public down. They keep a record of every comment that is made and then give the comments to the planning team to use as it sees fit. Because the public support or lack of support for the various design solutions under consideration has not been determined by a quantifiable vote, the planning team is free to interpret the results in a way that best suits their own preconceived biases and preferred design solutions. Another problem is the inattention to implementation. Typically, urban design plans contain dozens of actions that have been identified for implementation. Too frequently, however, there is no ranking or hierarchy of those actions, which to perform first and what to save for later. It is important for public agencies with limited human and financial resources to know whether they can realistically put a plan into action and whether there are sufficient funds for public investment needed to stimulate private development. As a rule of thumb, an effective transformation strategy will identify no more than half a dozen public actions for implementation within the first 5 years of its adoption. It will single out the most critical implementation actions as game changers, and it will provide a financial case to support the investment of public funds in improvements that will stimulate the private sector. Another problem is poorly trained professionals. Transforming a city is a complicated undertaking. There are no professional degrees that prepare an individual to understand and deal with the complexities of city transformation. Architects are trained to design buildings on a specific site. Landscape architects design parks and open spaces. City planners develop and administer building codes. None of these professionals are trained to think in a comprehensive way about cities, to integrate the many diverse elements that affect city life, or to design vital, healthy, functional neighborhoods and city centers. Most cities suffer from ever-increasing automobile traffic, and market forces typically cater to an automobile-centric city. Planners and urban designers have been hard-pressed to come up with effective strategies to counter these destructive trends. Another problem is short-term thinking. A let the market decide mentality is a sure formula for creating an unpleasant city. The typical development is not motivated to think big picture or to take responsibility for being a good neighborhood. Developers understand that their financial survival depends on minimizing risk and maximizing profits, so they are likely to favor short-term cookie-cutter projects that provide less exposure to risk than long-term projects requiring customized design. Unfortunately, elected officials and decision makers tend to defer to developers because they don't want to jeopardize potential tax revenues that developers' projects may generate. A case in point is the story of a light rail transit LRT system that cost millions of dollars in Aurora, Colorado. A local developer who owns hundreds of acres of underdeveloped land adjacent to one of the proposed stations was positioned to benefit substantially from the increase in land value due to proximity to the station. In return, the city rightfully expected something from the developer, such as high-density mixed-use urban project that would contribute more transit ridership and less auto travel. Unfortunately, the local developer rejected all proposals from the city to create a dense urban-style project. Instead, he made it clear that he preferred a low-density suburban development and that he was reserving a parcel of land for a Walmart store, a prime automobile-dependent destination. This is an example of how extreme short-term thinking, intended solely to generate immediate cash return. The tragedy is that the city of Aurora couldn't fight back because it didn't have the necessary codes and standards in place to promote development solutions consistent with the public's investment in the light rail transit system. Another problem is insufficient experience and expertise. Elected officials are seldom aware of what it takes to transform a city or town. Typically, they rely on local planning director to inform them of what needs to be done. In my experience, it is unusual to encounter a planning director who has had prior experience with preparing an effective transformation plan. In an absence of leadership and experience, piecemeal planning efforts are undertaken. Another problem is silo thinking. Government organizations are prone to silo thinking. Land use planners are typically at odds with transportation planners, and high-capacity transit agencies often see things differently than bus agencies. Without a mechanism to integrate these diverse perspectives, the potential benefits of strategies coordinated to address critical issues are lost.
Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe to get updates for future chapters.